Welcome to the programme, both. Now we're going to start with extremism. And of course, everybody will know by now that Michael Gove stood up in Parliament yesterday to launch a new definition of extremism for the UK government. Let's have a listen to a few seconds of what he said.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to make a statement about the next steps that we are taking in the government's strategy to counter extremism and to build greater national resilience and social cohesion. The United Kingdom is a success story, a multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy, stronger because of our diversity. But our democracy and our values of inclusivity and tolerance are under challenge from extremist groups which are radicalising our young people and driving greater polarisation within and between communities to further their own ends. As our new definition makes clear, extremism can lead to the radicalisation of individuals, deny people their full rights and opportunities, suppress freedom of expression, incite hatred, weaken social cohesion, and ultimately, it can lead to acts of terrorism. Today, my department is publishing an updated, more precise and rigorous definition of extremism, alongside a set of cross-government engagement principles for use when engaging with external groups. There is also detailed guidance on what the definition does and does not capture. And we're also setting up a new counter-extremism centre of excellence in my department as a world-leading authority on best practice, data and research.
So the important thing to notice here is this is for the use of government and so on. We'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. But first of all, I want to play a couple of seconds of what George Galloway had to say in response.
It's quite clear that there's a shared endeavour going on between the two front benches, but as questions have continued, it's quite clear there's unease on both sides of the House on the back benches, and for very good reasons. It is obviously true that this is part of a culture war wallpaper that's being created for the general election soon to come. It's not good enough to say that it doesn't seek to ban or jail anyone. You try getting a bank account once you've been branded by Michael Gove as an extremist.
So as I say, this has no legal standing as such, but I think that final point from Galloway is extremely important. And we've seen this type of thing in the past with people being denied bank accounts for being involved with certain types of campaign groups and so on. So an extremism tag is not going to be helpful, and it's not what happens legally here that matters. It's what happens in the corporate world, for example, with social media and so on. Now, the Gove very, very keen to, and he keeps saying it, this is nothing to do with restricting freedom of speech. Well, we'll have a look and see in a second about that and so on. So anyway, before we get to that, let's have a look at the actual definition. So here's what they have to say in the document. The threat from extremism has been steadily growing for many years. While the government and its partners have worked hard to combat this threat, the pervasiveness of extremist ideologies in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks in Israel on 7th of October 2023 highlighted the need for further action. So they say that extremism is the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred, or intolerance that aims to. Now, before we look at the aims, of course, there's quite a bit of difference between violence, hatred, and intolerance. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later and an extra. But anyway, that aims to, 1, negate or destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, or 2, undermines, overturns, or replaces the UK system of liberal democracy and democratic rights. That's an interesting one. Or 3, intentionally creates a permissive environment for others to achieve the results in 1 or 2. So they go on then to look at the aims that may be involved here. So aim 1 that they define is negate or destroy fundamental rights and freedoms. And they say behaviour against this, they define this as behaviour against a group or members of it that seeks to negate or destroy their rights to live equally under the law and free of fear, threat, violence and discrimination, including, for example, using, threatening, inciting, justifying, glorifying, or excusing violence towards a group in order to dissuade them from using their legally defined rights and freedoms. Aim 2, they define as undermine, overturn, or replace liberal democracy. And they say that this is all about attempts to undermine, overturn, or replace the UK system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights, including advocating that the UK's parliamentary democracy and democratic values and rights are not compatible with their ideology, and seeking to challenge, overthrow or change our political system outside of lawful means. And the first point I would make here is that, of course, this might be viewed as looking at things like Islamism or similar types of ideologies. But of course, I would make the point that the parliamentary democracy that we have at the moment is not compatible with our constitutional arrangements. And so does this apply to people that are campaigning for a return to the tenets of the British Constitution? Well, let's see what else they say here. Let's move on to the next one. So aim 2 also includes using, threatening, inciting, justifying, glorifying or excusing violence towards citizens. Fair enough, in order to dissuade them from participating freely in the democratic process. But of course, we've got to see this in the context of the narratives that have been built over the last few days and weeks about threats to members of Parliament. And therefore, we are not allowed to, we want to prevent people from protesting outside of constituency offices, for example. Then they go on to say, subverting the way public or state institutions exercise their powers in order to further ideological goals, for example, through entryism, or by misusing powers to encourage or encouraging others to do so. Now, entryism is where somebody from a campaign group surreptitiously decides to get themselves into, for example, the Conservative Party. We've got almost no sitting Conservative MPs that are prepared to stand at the coming general election. So, of course, there's plenty of opportunity for entryism here, where people would go in to the Tory party and attempt to get a place to stand in an election as a Tory, when in fact what they are doing is getting that Tory seat in order to pursue some other ideological aim. And then aim 2 continues by going on to say, using, threatening, inciting, justifying, glorifying, excusing violence towards public officials, including our armed forces, police forces, and members of local, devolved or national legislatures in order to dissuade them from conducting their obligations freely and fearlessly without external influence. We sort of covered that already. And here's the kicker for me: establishing parallel governance structures which, whether or not they have formal legal underpinning, seek to supersede the lawful powers of existing institutions of state. So this government and this parliament, because this is absolutely supported by the Labour Party as well, is panicking about people sidelining the parliament that sits because they no longer believe in what it stands for, and setting up their own parallel institutions, whatever that be, schools, hospitals, whatever it happens to be. They do not want this to take place. That is viewed as extremism, and they are not going to support that in any way, shape or form. Aim 3 then is all about enabling the spread of extremism. And they define that as intentionally creating a permissive environment for behaviour in Aim 1 or Aim 2, including providing an uncritical platform for individuals and representatives of groups or organisations that have demonstrated behaviour in either Aim 1 or Aim 2. This doesn't just apply to Islamism or whatever your bête noire is of the day. This applies to everybody. It goes on to say the dissemination of extremist propaganda and narratives that call for behaviour in either Aim 1 or 2. Well, just by coincidence, of course, Hope Not Hate just happened to put their latest State of Hate 2024 report out on the same day, at the same time that this announcement was being made by government. I asked myself then, did they get heads up that government was going to announce this on this particular day? UK column featured in this report, as it usually is. And I just want to mention this article here from David Frost, the former civil servant. The fight back against people who hate Britain has begun. This isn't just about people that would be classified as hating Britain. This is about people who actually hate, if hate is a word that you want to use, what our parliamentary democracy has become, and want to do something about it. So let's put that back on screen for a second and look at what he had to say. He says, none of this has legal force. It's guidance for government, nor is it about freedoms for speech. I think that's wrong, but anyway, it doesn't ban any organisation. It doesn't stop anyone saying anything. It just means that on the basis of what an organisation says or does, the government can decide not to interact with it, appoint its representatives to quangos, or give it taxpayers' money. I can't see what's wrong with that. Indeed, I approve of it. Well, actually, I believe it is all about freedom of speech. And again, just by coincidence, Ofcom publishes this at the same time. Encountering violent online content starts at primary school. And of course, this is all about extremism in schools. So lots of things going on at the same time. But Ben, I'm very interested in your thoughts on this, because it seems to me government is using the smokescreen of extremism from the usual groups to cover something which is actually much more broadly based.
Hey everyone, I'm Ben. I'm an extremist, according to Michael Gove. I think they're panicking. I think that building parallel systems is the route out of this craziness, and I've been doing a lot of work around this, over the past few weeks. So to see that pop up yesterday was kind of remarkable, actually. And yeah, it's not about protecting anybody. It's certainly not about protecting children. It's about maintaining the status quo. That's all it is. And suppressing fundamental rights and free speech and all of the things that we rely on for a well-functioning civilization.
I mean, what do you? I didn't agree with Galloway about his point about this just being something with respect to the election, because, as I've said, this is something which is supported by both parties. There's nothing to differentiate between them here, so it's not going to become an election issue. But his point about bank accounts, and the fact is that once you get on one of these lists, it starts impacting your life. This is a tricky area.
It's a very tricky area, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw the high-profile case last year with Nigel Farage being debanked by, I believe it was Coots, wasn't it?
Yes.
Maybe we're going to start seeing this play out more broadly across the population. Maybe we'll have problems in the coming months. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think that, my definitive view on this is that it's one of those classic things, right? Like the more that they try to lock this down, the more draconian they become. The more fervent and the pushback will be.
Yes, indeed. And I'll just say to anybody that's skeptical, anybody that uses terminology like "what can we do," we just do what we're doing because it's having an effect. This is clear. The Parliament getting extremely concerned about what's going on in the country at the moment, and this is not the right response, in my opinion. But anyway, Debbie,